Look around today. I mean, really look. We are living in a culture that is just completely, utterly obsessed with optimization, right? We practically worship the people burning the midnight oil, the relentless innovators, the folks whose lives just look absolutely immaculate on the surface. We celebrate the grind. We celebrate the hustle. But what if I told you that right beneath this polished, shiny veneer of extreme discipline, there is often a hidden, much darker psychological truth? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tearing down the facade of the ultimate modern virtue to look at the shadow it casts. We're going to explore how the exact same traits that build massive empires can completely isolate and destroy the human mind. Just listen to that desperate justification for a second. It's actually from a crazy story in our source material where two partners are trying to meticulously plan this massive high-stakes bank heist. But instead of, focusing on the vault codes or the security guards, one of them gets completely derailed. He starts obsessively cleaning the walls, totally freaking out over unwashed knives, terrified that the stove was left on. It sounds absurd, right? Almost comical. But underneath that comedy is a painful, glaring reality of modern anxiety. Because so often we masquerade our deepest, most paralyzing fears as simple hygiene or discipline or just having high standards. We tell ourselves and we tell everyone else that we're just, trying to protect us. Okay, let's actually dive into this, because this is where it gets incredibly personal for a whole lot of us. We tie our entire identities, our very worth as human beings, to relentless achievement and flawless execution. But at what point does that drive cross the invisible line from a healthy, normal ambition into a neurological prison? Like, is that intense, burning need to have absolutely everything exactly right a sign of your unparalleled genius, or is it actually a symptom of a debilitating illness? To answer that, we have to look at one of the most tragic and misunderstood figures of the entire 20th century. Part 1. The Trap of Perfection. The year is 1947. Picture this, a dimly lit, super glamorous Hollywood restaurant. Howard Hughes, the brilliant billionaire businessman, airline owner, film director, is on a romantic date with Jane Greer, literally one of the most beautiful actresses in the world. He has wealth, he has immense power, he is a total icon. Everything looks perfectly cinematic. But then, Hughes excuses himself to use the restroom. A minute passes, then 10, then 30, then an hour and a half. Jane is just left sitting there alone, waiting. When Hughes finally emerges, his explanation is chilling in its absurdity. A tiny, microscopic drop of ketchup had landed on his pants. He took them off, washed them, and waited 30 minutes for them to dry. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the exit. For over an hour, this absolute titan of industry stood completely paralyzed in a public bathroom. He physically could not bring himself to touch the doorknob. He was absolutely terrified of the invisible germs left behind by strangers. He was trapped, utterly hostage to his own mind, waiting helplessly until someone else walked in. He destroyed his date, and tragically, this agonizing moment completely foreshadowed the end of his life, where he lived totally isolated in a darkened, sanitized hotel room, terrified of the very sunlight. Part 2. A glitch in the brain. For decades, rumors just swirled around this guy. People said Hughes was mad, that he was an addict, that he had lost his mind to dementia. But a modern medical breakdown reveals a very, very different story. Hughes wasn't losing his grip on reality in some chaotic sense. His brain was actually trapped in a highly structured, inescapable, and totally debilitating neurological loop. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what was happening inside his head. Think of your brain as a complex machine. The orbitofrontal cortex is your alarm system, right? It detects a threat, like, say, germs on a doorknob. It sends a signal to the basal ganglia, which basically steps in to lower that stress. You wash your hands, the basal ganglia tells the alarm, okay, threat resolved, shut off. But in Hughes' brain, that communication channel glitches. The alarm just stays blaring at maximum volume. Your brain is permanently stuck screaming that you are in mortal danger, even though the problem was literally solved an hour ago. This neurological glitch is known as Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, or OCD. It is a severe anxiety disorder. Intrusive, terrifying thoughts, the obsessions, literally force the sufferer into repetitive physical actions, the compulsions, just to survive the mental agony. It's a painful reality. Today, massive icons like David Beckham openly discuss their intense struggles with OCD. But the defining feature here is self-awareness. People with OCD suffer immensely, and crucially, they know their fears are completely irrational. They know washing their hands 200 times doesn't actually make sense, but the broken alarm in their head gives them absolutely no choice. Fortunately, because they know it's an illness, about 70% of modern cases respond beautifully to therapy and medication. Part 3. The rewarded illness. But right here, I want you to imagine a massive, massive narrative pivot. What happens to the human mind when the script flips? Like, what happens when a person experiences these intense, overwhelming obsessions with perfection and detail, but instead of recognizing it as a glitch, they actually like it? What if they become absolutely convinced that they are the only sane person on Earth, and the rest of the world is just disgustingly broken, lazy, and chaotic? This is the crucial aha moment of our explainer. We cross the border from OCD, an anxiety disorder where the patient sees their obsessions as a curse ruining their life, into OCPD, Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder. Notice the P. This affects the entire personality. The glasses through which they view reality are permanently tinted. OCPD patients do not think they are sick. They don't want therapy. They view themselves as heroic, exhausted micromanagers tasked with the impossible burden of enforcing their rigid, perfect rules onto a deeply flawed reality. To understand the sheer gravity of this, let's look at Steve Jobs, who many psychological researchers strongly suspect suffered from severe OCPD. Imagine this. One weekend, a high-level Google executive named Vic Gandrodra receives a frantic, absolute emergency call from Jobs. Gandrodra naturally panics, assuming a catastrophic breakdown in the Apple-Google partnership. But the dire emergency? Jobs had noticed that on the iPhone screen, the yellow color of the second O in the Google logo was microscopically off-shade. And it wasn't just digital colors either. When Apple engineers, after grueling, sleepless nights, finally presented the very first functional Mac motherboard to Jobs, totally expecting praise, his reaction was explosive. He called it garbage. Why? Because the tiny internal screws that no customer would ever see in their lifetime, were not perfectly aligned. It had absolutely zero impact on the computer's function. But for an OCPD mind, invisible chaos is still chaos. He literally forced his exhausted engineers to completely tear apart and rebuild the machine just to make the hidden screws perfectly parallel. Now, just pause and look at these traits. Highly focused, meticulous attention to detail, frugal, unyielding standards. If you saw this list on a resume, right, you'd hire them immediately, no questions asked. And that is the terrifying trap of OCPD. It is perhaps the most socially accepted psychological disorder in human history. Our modern corporate culture actively, aggressively rewards this illness. We don't send these individuals to psychological therapy. We hand them billions of dollars, we put them on the covers of magazines, and we give them absolute power. Part 4. The cost of genius. But when we elevate an unchecked personality disorder to the status of modern mythology, the bill always comes due. And the human and financial toll of socially rewarded OCPD is utterly devastating. Just look at this number. After Jobs was ousted from Apple in 1985, his unchecked obsessions just ran wild at his new company Next. He micromanaged every solitary detail, from the exact angle of the computer's case to the polished keys. The result, the Next computer was delayed for years, and when it finally launched, adjusted for today's money, it cost $14,000. It was a beautiful, completely unsellable masterpiece of engineering that caused the company to lose over $100 million. Perfectionism, left entirely to its own devices, will literally bankrupt you. And look, this isn't just an isolated quirk of one eccentric tech billionaire. Studies show that up to 8% of the population might exhibit traits or potential cases of OCPD. Guys, that's 1 in 12 people. They are very often our most successful CEOs, politicians, and elite athletes. They are human machines. But because their entire self-worth is tethered to flawless execution, whenever reality inevitably falls short of perfection, which it always does, these highly successful individuals frequently spiral into severe, crushing depression. So where does this relentless, consuming drive actually come from? Is it nature or is it nurture? Fascinating twin studies out of Sweden, led by researcher Nancy Pedersen, revealed that this overwhelming pressure to work and accomplish is actually heavily genetic, somewhere between 27% and 78%. But genetics only load the gun. It's a person's childhood environment, the emotional landscape they are raised in, that ultimately pulls the trigger. For Jobs, the environmental trigger was profound. He was given up for adoption by both of his biological parents. The very first subconscious message he received from the universe was one of abandonment, that he was fundamentally unwanted. Psychologists theorize that his terrifying attention to detail, his absolute burning need to control the universe through Apple, was just a desperate, lifelong attempt to fill a massive emotional void. It's this heartbreaking belief that if you can just achieve enough, if you can just build a perfect enough product, you will finally be worthy of unconditional love. But OCPD doesn't create warmth, it creates emotional ice. The most tragic casualty of Jobs' obsession wasn't a product line, it was his relationship with his own daughter, Lisa. In her memoir, she describes living in a freezing room where her multimillionaire father refused to even fix the heating. When, as a 9-year-old, she innocently asked if she could have his Porsche one day, his response wasn't some gentle parental letdown. It was a cold, absolute, "You are getting nothing." Psychologists call this experiential avoidance. OCPD literally turns patients into living machines who subconsciously cut out the messy, unpredictable human connections that they cannot perfectly micromanage. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is if you map out the biological trap of the high achiever, it's an addiction cycle. It is no different than a drug. You feel anxious and empty, so you accomplish a task. Boom. Your brain releases endorphins, and you feel a brief, fleeting moment of relief. But the second those endorphins drop, the terrifying emptiness returns, and it's stronger than before. You aren't working to be happy anymore. You are desperately grinding away at the next bigger achievement just to feel a baseline level of normal. You are trapped in a relentless neurochemical hamster wheel.
Part 5. Running from the monster. So how do we actually reconcile this? We are looking at a psychological double-edged sword that is quite literally responsible for the shape of our modern reality, yet is capable of completely destroying the individual wielding it. Like, there is no denying the profound benefits of obsessive traits. Melville Dewey's intense obsession with the number 10 gave humanity the Dewey Decimal System, essentially organizing all of human knowledge. Charles Lindbergh's paranoid obsession with details birthed the mandatory flight checklists that keep millions of us safe in the sky every single day. They built the world. But unchecked, unmanaged, these very same traits lead straight to burnout, severe depression, catatonia, and the kind of total, tragic isolation that Howard Hughes died in.
Which leaves us with a profound, deeply personal question to end on today. As you look at your own life, your late-night emails, your endless to-do lists, your relentless strive for perfection, why are you doing it? Are you genuinely working to build something meaningful, to contribute to humanity and actually find joy in the process? Or, if you are truly honest with yourself, are you just running away from a dark, empty monster inside of you? Because if you're running, another promotion isn't going to save you. But recognizing the illusion of perfection, and maybe seeking therapy instead of just another achievement, absolutely can. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Think deeply about this one, and I'll see you next time.